panel discussion today. We have investing for 1.5 degrees, limiting the impact of climate change. Globally, we see that there is a continuous push towards the adoption of carbon neutral technology so that we can limit the global warming to less than 2 degrees, as has been agreed to at the Paris Agreement of the 21st Conference of the Parties. We have with us for this fireside chat Ms. Anita George. She's the Executive Vice President, Deputy Head, CDPQ Global and CDPQ India. And Mr. Dhanpal Jhaveri is the Vice Chairperson at Eversource Group and CEO, Eversource Capital. Over to you both.
Thank you, Shutapa, and a very good afternoon to all of you. And thank you to IVCA for organizing possibly one of the most important areas to talk about for this decade. When I was searching for a title for this session, one of the kind of thoughts was, how do I communicate what climate investing is all about in one phrase? And as Shutapa just talked about, investing for 1.5 degrees is a phrase which has its roots in 1992, when the world met at the Rio Earth Summit and took a pledge that we need to do something about global warming. Global warming is an issue which now is well known to all of us. We have read about it, we've heard about it, we've talked about it. But a way to put it together and to address it is something that came together in 2015 at the Paris Climate Agreement, where 195 nations took a pledge to decide that by the middle of this century, we should ensure that we are a net zero carbon or greenhouse gas emitting world, such that by the end of the century, the increase in global warming should be restricted to 2%, preferably to 1.5%. Now, net zero is a concept that came through as a result of all the activity which we have undertaken over the last 100 years since the Industrial Revolution, where the world has emitted greenhouse gases to the level where we now need to not only get to a peak, but start reducing it by as much as 50% over the next 10 years if we are to meet these ambitious targets of restricting the climate change to not more than 1.5 degrees. Having said that, it's a very daunting and a challenging task ahead of every nation, every corporate, and every citizen of every country. However, there is a huge amount of tailwinds, whether it be from government action, whether it be from a consumer mindset, whether it be from the commercial ability to upfront capital investment to attempt to basically reach this target. And to discuss this, what are the issues, how it can be done, I have with me my very dear friend, Anita George, EVP at CDPQ. Anita, very good afternoon.
Thank you, Dhanpal. It's a pleasure to be here with you and all our friends at IVCA.
Could you kindly take a few minutes to talk about yourself? I know that you have a personal passion for climate change and for climate investing, but even talk about a little bit about what CDPQ's objectives are over here and how you are looking to integrate it within the broader national context of India.
Thank you, Dhanpal. So just for myself, I would say that I think this is, as you rightly said, the most important topic for survival. And it's not just something to talk about, but something that we collectively have to really do and deliver. Because otherwise, we are really going to end up not with 1.5 degrees, but with 3, some studies say even up to 5 degrees. And already, given where we are today, if you look at the kind of impacts. So I represent CDPQ, which is Canada's second largest pension fund manager, and we are investing the savings of 6 million Quebecers. We have an AUM of about 365 billion Canadian dollars. And for us, we were very early players in terms of recognizing that we cannot just be investing for investing's sake, but we have to really put our money where our commitment is. And our commitment, and I would even go as far as saying that investing for 1.5 is part of our DNA now. So we started way back in 2006 as founding members of the UN PRI Principles of Responsible Investment, which had a very key aspect of preserving, conserving the environment as well as biodiversity. And often biodiversity is something that we forget about, but I think in our conversation we should talk about it because, again, it's something very critical. The second thing I would say is that for CDPQ, we realize that this cannot be, sustainable investment and then normal investment. We had to integrate it. So something we did in 2017 was to declare how we will reduce our carbon footprint, how we will do more green investments, and linked it to our variable pay and compensation so that we had everybody in the organization from the youngest member to the CEO all aligned in the same direction. You would have heard recently about heat waves in India. Of course, we are very used to it. But in Canada, for example, temperatures went up to 49 degrees centigrade, unheard of, unseen before, and actually 500 people died. So I think it's coming closer and closer to all of us. COVID, if you ask me, has been the great equalizer, ironically, in that it's affected all countries. The virus knows no borders and it doesn't distinguish between rich and poor. So I think all of us, there's a collective recognition that we have to do something significant to be able to meet the 1.5.
Thank you, Anita. I think that's so relevant and so important in the kind of current pandemic situation that we are in. We started Eversource Capital 3 years ago, and Eversource is an equal partnership between the Everstone Group and Lightsource BP, which is one of the world's largest renewable companies. And we started it with the support of both the Indian and the UK governments. So this was a true public-private partnership with the primary objective, or I would say the sole objective, of creating positive change in climate investing. And to a certain extent, even acting as a catalyst for global capital into the climate investing opportunity in India. Over the last 3 years, as we've built our business, I've come to recognize and understand the complexity and the gravity of this problem. But at the same time, I think we Indians always, have this very strong desire to look at things from a positive perspective and to be these positive, I would say, enablers of change. So if you look at...
Actually, Dhanpal, if I could jump in, I think this is also part of India's DNA. The whole concept of things like circular economy, recycling, these are things our great grandparents were already doing. So I think for us, it's really about taking advantage of the opportunity and going back to our roots in some sense of how we should be looking at life.
That's a great point, and I'm going to take you up on that as we talk more about what the opportunities are in India. But I think what has happened as a result of this massive wave of pledges and support is that nations across the world have taken these pledges to become net zero. Corporations have stepped in big time. And as I remember in one of these earlier sessions, someone mentioning, a lot of I would say, talk is there, but the ability to act and make that difference, there's yet a little bit of a question mark in terms of how much can they actually achieve and make happen. So if you look at it, that besides nations and corporations and consumers to a certain extent, how are investors' mindsets changing? And what is it that you're seeing from a proactive basis, investors taking steps to support this program?
I would say, Dhanpal, something that has really struck me. So when we came out with our targets in 2017, we had originally thought that we bring together a collective of all the Canadian pension funds to start with, but also other institutional investors. And we spent a lot of time talking about a common ground that all of us could agree to, right? But in 2017, we said, let's lead by example. Let's come out and actually make public our own targets for our portfolio and what we want to do. Let's disclose it annually, and let's have a third party verify what we are saying so that we're really holding ourselves to test. The wonderful thing that has happened, and for me, it's really seeing it before my eyes, is that we now have um, 15 institutions with $8 trillion of assets under management who've come together under the Investor Leadership Network. And all of us collectively are pledging towards climate targets. And you're right that 2050 seems far away, but in terms of the kind of effort that has to be made, it really has to begin now. So, in addition to the institutional investors, which is pension funds as well as sovereign wealth funds and insurance companies, for example, we also have large hedge funds, we have private equity funds who were more mainstream and really investing in everything, coming together and saying, we have to make sure that sustainability is mainstreamed. We have to make sure that ESG is part and parcel of the way in which we invest. And I see that now, even in terms of a sort of convergence on measurement and disclosure. As you would have heard, the Sustainability Standards Board of IFRS is planning to come out during COP26 with actual standards for ESG, which would be measurable, verifiable, and already a large number of the Fortune 500, as well as institutional investors like ourselves and groups of us like ILN. We have the Maple 8, which are the largest 8 Canadian pension funds with about 1.6 trillion under management. And we are all coming together and saying, okay, we will adopt these standards and have our investee companies also adopt them. The other thing, I think the approach we are taking is one of stewardship, where we are saying, let's get everybody to sort of sign up towards common goals that will address the problem, not just of climate, but also of the social aspects. And one thing, if you look at what COVID has taught us, is that really you cannot forget the social aspects, and that the social aspects and climate aspects are very, I would say, intricately intertwined, to the extent that having a high PM 2.5 level, in my view, is really lowering your resistance and resilience against COVID today, but many other pandemics that are going to come our way, unless we sort of take action now. So I would say that no longer is it a tick the box. All of the large institutional capital, and we are talking about close to 150 trillion investable long-term capital, that is coming together and saying, okay, we have to take action, we have to be accountable, we have to measure, disclose, and I see really a big wave of capital moving in this direction.
Anita, I must totally agree with you because my own experiences over the last 3 years as we have set up and raised funds for Eversource Capital, I've spent more than 200 days on the road. I've met more than 300 investors, and I think while there are a lot of practical challenges in terms of how capital gets allocated and then routed into climate investing, the deep desire for everyone was to see how they could actually enable that and make that happen. What we took a lesson from all of that was that there is clearly a role for a commercial capital, but which has impact embedded into its underwriting process. And that's what we started adopting from day one, that while we are basically investing, are we investing to do good for the climate, becomes an equally important metric as we look to see if that investment is going to drive commercial returns for us and our investors. And I think there is Vineet, who took the first session today, made an interesting point around absolute return versus return with resilience. And I think the term resilience, we've all got to understand it over the last 12 months in a way where none of us had an exposure to. And the other point that you make, I think, is that we've also got to thank COVID, and what the pandemic did is to give us a little bit of a glimpse in terms of how this world will look from a pollution perspective, from a transportation perspective, from just a better life perspective, right? Living standards perspective. And I think all of that culminates into a very an interesting situation, right? And which is what I want to talk about next, is that this opportunity vis-a-vis India, right? What do you believe? Because India has some very peculiar traits where we are one of the fastest growing economies. And therefore, we are not at the stage where we've peaked in terms of industrial development. At the same time, we've got a huge portion of the population which need to be lifted out and be able to get to a standard where the lifestyle is something that they can support for themselves. And finally, we need to do it all in a sustainable manner, right? What is your view of how India can leapfrog, almost kind of, take a shift beyond just going the kind of, I would say, the historical basis for becoming a fully developed economy and using this climate as an opportunity to basically leapfrog that? How do you think about it?
I think India really does have a comparative advantage. We have an opportunity, a golden opportunity to really lead the world, I would say. I'd be bold enough to say that we can actually lead the world. And my belief is centered around a couple of things. One, we have 50% of our buildings, for example, yet to be built. So in addition to retrofitting what we already have, we have an opportunity to build differently. All the affordable housing, all the buildings that we're talking about, really we should be looking into new construction materials, using technology in a way, using IoT to make sure that we are energy and water efficient in our buildings. That should take care of a huge change in terms of energy consumption, water conservation, etc. We have 25 million more trucks that are expected to be on the road by 2040. So something like what you are doing, Dhanpal, in the Green Growth Equity Fund on e-mobility, that is, especially on the public transport side, I think that's something where we can really put all our forces together and not end up making 25 million diesel trucks, but really go toward EV in a big way. Any area that you look at, I feel that India has also the ability, we are very good at software from a technology point of view. And really, the future of manufacturing is coming from deep tech, AI, machine learning, 3D printing. And these are areas where, just as we did earlier in terms of the IT industry, we can really I think, pull our forces together to make sure that we use technology to accelerate, to scale, to come up with solutions that can lower emissions. A third point I would make, I talked a lot about investors and the sound of capital, that wall of capital that wants to come and is looking for destination. I think India also has the advantage of market. We have a very young population, and all the studies and surveys that we see, we are being told that this young population is willing to pay more for goods that are produced sustainably, and that there is a rising sort of retail investor interest, as well as consumers voting with their rupee votes to say that we want green, we want sustainable. So I think these two forces coming together of capital looking for green and consumers looking for green can really be the turning point for India. So yes, I believe we can leapfrog.
I almost think, Anita, this is like a telecom moment of the 90s. We are in that situation where the next decade, if we can packetize, right? If you look at the whole energy value chain, from
Right.
generation to transportation to supply and to consumption, if there is a way to packetize, digitize, democratize the whole energy value chain, there is a huge opportunity across all of these legs of the value chain to actually create businesses and new business models. And that's where really we think, at least we at Eversource are firmly of the belief that that's the way to basically leapfrog this whole, traditional systems of how do you deliver and consume energy. So with that, I guess we are running out of time. Would have loved to have more conversation on this. You and I discussed that. I think the topic could cover maybe 3 hours of discussion, not 30 minutes. But
Yeah.
great to have you over here, Anita. Thanks a lot for your time. And thank you all at IVCA and for everyone who's joined and participating in this conference.
Thank you, Dhanpal, and thank you, everyone in the audience.
Thank you so much, Ms. George, and thank you so much, Mr. Javeri, for sharing your insights. We once again thank everybody else who's watching our webinar and request you to kindly exit this session and join us for the next one. Thank you.